The yellow notice was taped to a door the county did not believe was a door. Unpermitted structure. Unapproved dwelling. 30 days to respond. Demolition on the table. Underneath the notice was a piece of storm drain pipe. 30 feet long. Bought for $350 off the back lot of a concrete yard in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Inside was a polished floor. A wooden door. Aluminum framed glass. Warm laminate paneling on the ceiling that curved like the inside of a chapel. The woman standing in front of that notice was 39 years old. Her name was Odessa Brennan. Her right hand was resting on a small olive wood cross around her neck, the only thing her mother had left her. And she was whispering 4 words, over and over, so quiet you could barely hear them. You brought me here. 20 months before this moment, Odessa had been sleeping in a 1998 Ford Ranger with her 6-year-old son Rowan. 20 months of cardboard in the windows. 20 months of $3 showers at a community center. 20 months of driving up Mingus Mountain on Saturday nights just so her boy could sleep in air that was 25 degrees cooler than the desert floor. She had built this house with her own 2 hands. 1,400 hours of labor. $2,100 total. And now the county wanted to bulldoze it. But the reason they did not, the reason a stranger drove out to that pecan orchard the following Saturday morning and changed everything, was stamped on the end of the pipe. Copper Ridge, and opened at 5 in the morning. But Odessa Brennan was there at 4:40. Every day. For 13 years. She'd parked her old Ford Ranger under the mesquite tree at the far end of the lot. Left the radio on low. Bowed her head. Whispered the same words her mother had whispered every morning for 40 years before her. Lord, let my hands be useful today. Then she opened her Bible on the passenger seat. Read 1 verse. Just 1. Closed the book. Kissed the olive wood cross around her neck. And walked into work. The time clock was mounted on a green wall by the linen closet. And every morning, Odessa punched her card at 4:58. Never 4:57. Never 4:59. Because being early wasn't being on time. And being late was disrespect. That's what her father used to say. Right before he went to pour concrete on Highway 89, in boots that had holes in the toes. For 13 years, Odessa managed 24 housekeeping staff at the Copper Ridge Inn. She knew every one of them by name. Knew Marisol's daughter was starting kindergarten. Knew Yolanda's husband had gotten sober last April. Knew that Delphine only ever ate her lunch in the walk-in freezer because it was the only place she could cry without anyone seeing. Odessa saw everything. That was the job. Not the sheets. Not the towels. Not the little bottles of shampoo lined up in perfect rows. The people. The people were the job. She was 39 years old. She had a 6-year-old boy named Rowan, who was in kindergarten across town, at a school called Willow Creek Elementary. Rowan was small for his age. Big brown eyes. And a habit of asking questions Odessa did not always know how to answer. Questions like, Mama, why does the moon follow us? And Mama, when I grow up, can I have a job like you? And, once, in the back seat of the Ranger, quietly, as the sun was going down, Mama, does God have a favorite kid? She'd almost driven off the road. Because she didn't know what to say. Because she wanted to say yes, and it's you. But that felt like a lie a mother tells, because she's tired. So instead, she said, God loves every kid the same, baby. But he listens close when you talk to him. And Rowan had thought about that for a long time. And then he said, okay, then I'm gonna talk loud. And Odessa had laughed until she cried. That was the life. That was all of it. A small apartment on Willow Springs Drive. A boy who talked to God without fear. A truck that started most mornings. A job she was good at. A church where the same 7 old ladies asked about Rowan every single Sunday. It wasn't a big life. But it was hers. And then it wasn't. The owner of Copper Ridge Inn was a man named Harlan Beaufort. 76 years old. Silver mustache. BLO tie every day of the week, even at funerals. He'd built the inn in 1979 with a bank loan and his own back. He liked Odessa. Called her ma'am. Sent her home with leftover birthday cake from the front desk parties. And every Christmas, he wrote her a card by hand. The last one said, "You keep this place standing, Odessa. Don't ever leave me." She read it 3 times. Put it in her top drawer. He died on the 9th of March, 2022. Heart attack. In his sleep. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Odessa wore her Sunday dress. Rowan wore a clip-on tie that kept coming undone. She stood in the back of the church and watched Harlan's 2 grown children, a lawyer from Denver and a real estate consultant from Scottsdale, nod at everyone and check their phones. She had a bad feeling in her chest. Not grief. Something else. Something like a door already closing. 11 days later, the notice went up in the break room. Copper Ridge Inn will be permanently closing on March 31st, 2022. Property has been sold to Sagebrush Hospitality Group, LLC. Please clear personal belongings by end of shift. That was it. That was the whole letter. 2 paragraphs. 1 signature. And 13 years of Odessa's life folded up inside it like an old bedsheet. She read it twice. Then a 3rd time. Then she went to the walk-in freezer. Because Delphine had been right all along. It really was the only place to cry. She got a new job in 6 days. Cleaning vacation rentals in the foothills. $12 an hour. No benefits. No hours guaranteed. And she got another job the following week. Prep cook at a taqueria on Gurley Street. 6:30 in the morning until 11. Then straight to the vacation rentals until 7. 2 jobs. 13 hours a day. Half the pay. She smiled. She thanked God. She kept going. Because that's what you do. You keep going. Until you can't. June 2022. The letter came in a plain white envelope. From a management company Odessa had never heard of. She read it standing in her kitchen. Rowan was drawing dinosaurs at the table behind her. Due to market adjustments and updated valuation of our portfolio, the monthly rent for Unit 4B at Willow Springs Apartments will increase from $550 to $100, effective August 1st, 2022. She read it again. Because that couldn't be right. Except it was. Because California money had been pouring into Prescott for 18 months. Whole apartment buildings were being bought up by investment firms, with names that sounded like law offices. And rents were going up. Everywhere. All at once. Odessa sat down at the kitchen table across from Rowan. He looked up. Held out his drawing. A brontosaurus with a big smile. "Mama, look. He's happy because he found a friend." "Baby?" "What?" "Mama loves you so much." "I know. You know that, right?" "Yeah, Mama." He looked at her funny. Then he went back to drawing. Because he was 6. Because he didn't yet know what a rent increase was. Because he still lived in a world where dinosaurs found friends and mothers held it all together. That night, after he was asleep, Odessa sat on the bathroom floor, with the door closed, and put her forehead against the cool tile. And she said out loud, to the empty room, "Lord, I've been faithful. I need you to be faithful now." She fell behind in August. She caught up in September. Just barely. She fell behind again in October. The eviction notice was pink. She never knew evictions came in pink until she saw it there, taped to her door, above the little wreath she'd made from dried lavender. 60 days to vacate. She applied to 14 apartments. 14. She filled out the forms at the public library on a computer that made a sound every time she pressed a key. She wrote her application essays in the Notes app on her phone at red lights. Everyone came back the same way. Due to your prior eviction filing, we are unable to move forward. She stopped opening the emails after the 8th one. Because a pink piece of paper had made her invisible. Because in Prescott, Arizona, in the summer of 2022, a working woman with a good job history and a 6-year-old boy could not find a place to sleep. Not for any price. Not for any promise. The door was closed. All the doors. And so she went to the truck. The Ford Ranger was a 1998 extended cab. Faded blue paint. A tape deck that hadn't worked since 2011. She'd bought it from her cousin for $800 when Rowan was 2 months old. And it had never once, in 6 years, let her down. The first night, she parked at a Walmart. Rowan slept in the front passenger seat with his blanket over him. Odessa sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dome light. Around 3 in the morning, a security guard tapped on the window. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here overnight." "I'm sorry. I'll go." "Where you going?" "I don't know." He looked at her for a long moment. Looked at the sleeping boy. Then he sighed. "Try Grace Methodist over on Copper Basin. They don't chase folks off." She did not cry until he walked away. Grace Methodist Church sat on a hill just south of downtown. It was a small white building with a red door and a bell that had been ringing every Sunday since 1934. The parking lot was in the back, under 2 big cottonwoods. Quiet. Dark. Nobody watching. Odessa parked in the same spot every night. She learned the rhythm of the block. What time the neighbor across the fence walked his old lab. What time the sprinklers came on in the church garden. She got a routine. 4:40 a.m. Start the truck. Roll out of the lot before the sun came up. Drive to the community center on Willis Street. $2 for a shower. Another $1 for Rowan. Rowan hated the community center showers. The floor was cold. The stalls had gaps in the doors. And once, a woman with sores on her arms had asked him for $1. He didn't cry. He held his mama's hand tighter. But he stopped talking to God for a while after that. Odessa noticed. She didn't say anything. Because she didn't know what to say. Because a mother's job is to hand her child a world that makes sense. And she could not hand him this one. She kept both jobs. The taqueria. The vacation rentals. She added a third, overnight stocking at a grocery store on Fair Street, 3 nights a week 10 to 4. She slept in the truck between shifts. In the parking lot. In her uniform. With her boots still on. Rowan started 1st grade in August. She dropped him off at Willow Creek Elementary at 7:45 every morning. In the same clothes he worn to school the day before. She used the sink at the community center. Dish soap. A 5-gallon bucket. Hung his shirts on the seat backs to dry while she drove. She ironed his church clothes on the tailgate of the Ranger. She braided her own hair in the driver's seat, in the yellow glow of the dome light, watching Rowan's small face in the passenger seat, jaw slack with sleep, one hand curled up under his cheek. And she made a rule. The rule was, nobody at school will know. Nobody. Not the teacher. Not the principal. Not the other mothers at the pickup line. Because they would call. They would call, and they would come, and they would take him. A caseworker at the shelter had said it gently. That had been the worst part. Gently, without malice. There are temporary placements available. Foster care. Just for a little while. Odessa had thanked her, and walked out to the parking lot. Sat in the truck. Put both hands on the steering wheel. And made a decision that she would carry for the rest of her life. Over my dead body. She said it out loud. To nobody. To God. Over my dead body. She kept going to church. Every Sunday. She would not miss. She washed Rowan's white shirt in the sink at Grace Methodist itself. Early. Before anyone came in. Wrung it out. Ironed it on the folding table in the fellowship hall, with an iron she kept under the passenger seat. She scrubbed his little dress shoes with a toothbrush. She combed his hair with her fingers dipped in a paper cup of water. And she carried him into that church every Sunday like nothing was wrong. And the 7 old ladies still asked after him. And Mrs. Truitt, who was 82 and mostly deaf, still bent down to tell him he had grown a whole inch since last week. And Rowan still put his hand in his mother's hand during the closing hymn. And Odessa still sang. She sang. Because if she stopped singing, she would break. She started a notebook. A small one. Green cover. $2 at the drugstore. On the first page, she wrote Day 1. That was August 3rd, 2022. Every night, before she fell asleep in the driver's seat, she wrote the day number. Sometimes she added a line. Sometimes she didn't. Day 47. He asked when we go home. I said soon. Day 92. Truck battery dying. Fixed it. Day 148. He's not asking anymore. Day 187. He asked if God can see us. I said yes. Then I cried when he fell asleep. Day 224. First thrust. Ran the engine for warmth. 22 minutes. Day 291. He got a gold star in reading. He put it on the dashboard. Day 340. I am so tired. Day 401. He hugged me for no reason. Day 462. A woman at the food bank gave him a blanket. She said an angel told her to. I believe her. That was the notebook. That was the record. Because the alternative was to forget. And she would not forget. Winter came. Winter went. The truck heater worked if she idled the engine. So she idled the engine. And Rowan pressed his hands against the vents and said, Mama, my hands are warm now. Winter was not the hard part. July was the hard part. The Ranger sat in the sun in a Sonoran valley in July, and by 9 in the morning it was 120 degrees inside. By noon it could kill you. They could not stay in the truck during the day. So on Odessa's off days, she drove. She drove up Mingus Mountain. An hour each way. Half a tank of gas she couldn't afford. Up the long switchbacks, through Jerome, past the copper mine, past the ghost buildings, and the old cemetery, all the way up to nearly 7,000 feet. Where the air was pines and dust. Where the temperature dropped 25 degrees. Where a boy could sleep. She would park at a turnout, with a view of the whole Verde Valley below. Rolled down the windows. Let the wind come through. And Rowan would climb into the back and stretch out on the bench seat, arms flung wide, and fall asleep in about 4 minutes. And Odessa would sit in the driver's seat, looking down at the valley, at the town, so small in the distance, and she would talk to God. She would say, I don't understand what you're doing. And there would be no answer. Just wind. Just the boy sleeping. Just the pine trees leaning. And Odessa would put her forehead against the steering wheel. And she would keep going. She had a coffee can under the passenger seat. Every dollar she could keep back went into the can. Every quarter. Every crumpled bill. She wasn't saving for anything specific. She just knew she needed something to save for. Because the day you stop saving is the day you stop believing there's going to be a tomorrow. By the summer of 2023, the can had $268 in it. 14 months of overtime and skipped meals. $268. She counted it once a week. Sunday nights. Rowan asleep. Dome light on low. She would spread the bills on her thigh and count them slow. And then she would put them back in the can and screw the lid on tight. And she would tell herself one day, this is going to be a door. She didn't know what she meant. She just knew it. August 27, 2023. Day 390 in the notebook. Odessa got off her afternoon shift at the vacation rental. 3:40 in the afternoon. Sky was that dead white color it gets before a monsoon. Her truck was at the community center, charging its battery. She walked half a mile down Miller Valley Road toward the pickup point where a co-worker was going to give her a ride to the taqueria. And the sky opened up fast. She'd lived in Arizona her whole life. Knew how monsoons worked. Knew you had about 90 seconds between the first big drop and the wall of water. She looked around. There was nothing. A frontage road. A cinderblock wall. And 20 yards off the shoulder, a big round black hole in the earth, where a storm drain cut under Highway 89A. She ran. Because there was nothing else. Her sneakers slapped through the first sheets of rain. Her uniform stuck to her back. Her hair whipped in her face. She ducked under the concrete lip of the culvert. Went 10 feet in. Stopped. Turned around. And watched the desert disappear behind a wall of white water. She stood there panting. Heart pounding. Rain hammering the earth 20 feet from where she stood. And then, slowly she noticed. She noticed she wasn't hot. She wasn't hot. She was standing inside 8 feet of reinforced concrete pipe in the middle of a Sonoran desert monsoon, and she was cool. Not shaded cool. Not shadow cool. Basement cool. The kind of cool estate that had no basements did not have a word for. She put her hand on the wall. The concrete was cold. Dry. Clean. She listened. The sound of the storm outside was going soft. Round. Almost musical. Like the pipe was catching the rain in a giant open hand and letting it fall. She looked up. The curved ceiling was smooth. The seam where the pipe joined itself was almost invisible. The whole thing was one huge stone throat, arching over her head like the inside of a chapel. And she thought, wait. Wait. Her mind started running. Concrete holds temperature. Daddy used to say that. Daddy used to check the slab in the morning. Because it would sweat. Because it was cold at dawn even in June. Because concrete keeps whatever you charge it with. And if you keep the sun off it, if you insulate it on the outside, if you burn dirt against it, she couldn't finish the thought. Because the thought was too big. She sat down. Right there. On the cold curved floor of the culvert. In her wet uniform. She put her hands over her face. And she said, Lord, is this what I think it is? The rain kept falling. The pipe kept singing. She sat there for 40 minutes after the rain stopped. Because she didn't want to leave. Because she was afraid to leave. Because she was afraid, if she stepped outside, the thought would evaporate. But she was also afraid to stay. Because if the thought was real, then she had work to do. Then she had to get up. Then she had to walk out of this pipe and go start. She got up. Slow. She wiped her hands on her pants. She walked to the mouth of the culvert. She looked out at the wet desert. the creosote steaming in the late sun, the mountains dark and clean and washed. And she said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay, Lord." She walked to the taqueria. She was 40 minutes late. Her boss docked her the shift. She didn't say a word. That night, she picked Rowan up from the church nursery, where the pastor's wife watched him on Odessa's late shifts. He was asleep in a beanbag chair, holding a picture book about a fox who lived in a hole. She carried him to the truck, buckled him in, drove to the Grace Methodist lot, parked under the cottonwoods, sat there for a long time, and then on the passenger seat she opened the notebook. Day 390. She looked at the page. She thought. She wrote, "God showed me something today. I don't understand it yet, but I saw it, and I'm going to build it, if He lets me." And she closed the notebook, and she sat in the dark, listening to her son breathe. And she prayed for the courage to walk into a concrete yard and ask a foreman a question she did not yet know how to ask. The next morning, she went to the library on Goodwin Street. She waited outside for it to open at 9. She walked to the desk, and she said to the librarian, very quietly, "I'm looking for books on earth-sheltered homes." The librarian was a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of face that had answered 10,000 strange questions without ever making a single person feel strange. She looked up at Odessa, considered her, and smiled. "Now that," she said, "is a fun question." Odessa did not laugh, but something small in her chest moved sideways. Something like relief. The librarian walked her back to the 690s. Pulled down 4 books. One about thermal mass. One about underground homes in Missouri. One about Adobe. One about a builder in New Mexico who had made a house out of tires and beer cans and lived in it for 30 years. Odessa took all 4. She sat down at a wooden table by the window. She read for 2 hours. She missed her shift at the vacation rental. She didn't care, because the pipe had not been a coincidence. Because concrete pipe, buried in earth, insulated on the outside, could hold a temperature of 78 degrees on a 108-degree day, without air conditioning, without electricity, just concrete, and dirt, and math. She wrote all of it down in the notebook. She drew diagrams on the backs of her seats. She sketched a floor plan on a napkin from the coffee cart. And when she finally closed the last book, she sat there staring out the window at the cars going by on Goodwin Street. And she thought, "I know how to do this. Daddy taught me. I know how to do this. I need a pipe. I need land. I need him to send me the people." She picked Rowan up from school at 3:15. He climbed into the passenger seat with a paper hat on that said Math Superstar in green marker. She said, "Baby?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "I want you to pray for something with me." He said, "Okay." "What?" And she said, "I want you to pray that God sends Mama a piece of pipe." And Rowan looked at her, and he did not laugh. Because at 6 years old, if your mama tells you to pray for something, you pray for it. He closed his eyes. He said, "Dear God, please send my mama a piece of pipe. In Jesus' name. Amen." He opened his eyes. He looked at her. He said, "Mama, why do you need a piece of pipe?" And Odessa Brennan, 39 years old, laughed for the first time in a year and a half. She really laughed. Big. Loud. Head back. Hands on the steering wheel. Laughed until her stomach hurt. And then she said, "Because, baby, because God is going to build us a house. And He's going to start with a piece of pipe." Rowan thought about this for a long moment. Then he nodded solemnly, the way 6-year-olds nod when they've decided something is true. He said, "Okay." And Odessa put the truck in drive. And she pulled out of the school parking lot. And she drove toward the setting sun, past the mountains, where the monsoon clouds were building again, and she felt, for the first time, since Harlan Beaufort died on the 9th of March, 2022, like a door had opened somewhere. She could not see it yet, but she could feel the wind coming through it. That night, she made a list. She sat in the truck at Grace Methodist, dome light on, Rowan asleep in the passenger seat, and she wrote on the last page of the green notebook, "Things I need. 1. A pipe. Big. 30 feet if possible. 2. Land. Cheap. Legal to build on. 3. Tools. 4. Time. 5. Someone who knows electrical. 6. Someone who knows codes." She looked at the list. 6 things. 6 impossible things. She underlined the last 2. And then, in smaller letters, at the very bottom of the page, she wrote, "You brought me this far." She closed the notebook. She turned off the dome light. She sat in the dark and listened to her son breathe. And she did not know it yet, she could not know it yet, but 412 miles of driving over the next 3 weeks would lead her to a foreman named Silas Broussard, on the back lot of a concrete yard in Prescott Valley, standing in front of a 30-foot section of storm drain pipe, with a crack down its side, and a red X spray painted on its rim, marked for demolition at the end of the month. And Silas would look at her, and she would count out $350 from a coffee can on the tailgate of his truck, and he would push 30 of them back across the metal. But before he did, before the pipe, before the land, before the strangers who would carry her, there was one more test. One more thing she would have to lose before God would let her build. And it came in the mail 3 days later. The envelope was pink. She saw the color first, because pink meant eviction. Pink meant 60 days. Pink meant the whole world ending again. Her hands were shaking before she even opened the envelope. She was standing at the church mailbox on Copper Basin Road. Rowan was in the truck, with the door open, kicking his feet against the running board. She turned the envelope over. Yavapai County Assessor's Office. Not eviction. Her knees almost went out from under her. She sat down on the curb. Right there. In her uniform. In front of God, and the mailbox and everyone. And she opened it. Voter registration confirmation. Please retain for your records. That was the letter. A voter registration card. Because she'd updated her address 6 months ago to a P.O. box at the community center. Not the county coming for her. Not the end. She started laughing. Then she started crying. Then she was doing both at the same time, on the curb outside Grace Methodist Church, holding a voter registration card like it was a love letter from heaven. Rowan leaned out of the truck. "Mama? I'm okay, baby. You're crying. I know. But you're laughing. I know." "Why?" She looked up at him, wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Because sometimes God sends a letter just to remind you you're still on the list." Rowan thought about that. Then he said, "I don't get it." And she laughed harder. Because she didn't get it either. She drove to Broussard Concrete and Precast the next Saturday. She had called first. She had called 4 concrete yards. The first one hung up on her. The second one said no. The third one said, "Lady, we're not a charity." The fourth one was Broussard. A woman had answered. Older. Chewing gum. Sounded like she'd been chewing that same piece of gum since 1987. Odessa had asked her question. "Do you ever have pipe you can't sell?" The woman on the phone had paused. Then she'd said, "Hold on." Then she'd said, "Silas." Phone. Some lady askin about seconds. There had been a shuffling sound. A door opening. Boots. Then a man's voice. Deep. Slow. Careful. "This is Broussard." Odessa had explained. Not everything. Not the truck. Not the boy. Not the notebook. Just a project. A structure. She was looking for something they were going to throw away. He had listened. He had not interrupted. And when she was done, he had said, "Saturday morning. 9 o'clock. I'll show you the back lot." That was it. That was the whole conversation. 6 sentences. And her whole life turned on it. She drove into the yard at 8:52 on Saturday. Because being early wasn't being on time. Broussard Concrete and Precast sat on 18 acres of hardpan at the edge of Prescott Valley. Concrete forms stacked 20 feet high. A truck scale. A yellow crane. A little office trailer with a wooden ramp. The whole place smelled like wet stone and diesel. Odessa parked at the end of the ramp. She took her hands off the wheel. She looked at Rowan. "You stay here, baby." "Okay." "You color." "You red." "You don't get out." "Okay. I'll be right back." He nodded. Then he said, very seriously, "Mama, I prayed." She kissed the top of his head. She walked into the office. Silas Broussard was 72 years old. 6 feet tall. Silver hair combed back. Reading glasses hanging from a lanyard. A face like a granite outcropping, hard and lined and honest. He was wearing a gray work shirt, with his name embroidered over the pocket. He looked up from a stack of invoices as Odessa came in. "Ma'am." "Mr. Broussard?" "Silas." "Odessa." He stood up. He walked around the desk. He said, "Boots?" She said, "What?" He said, "You wearing good boots?" She looked down at her feet. "Sneakers." "Old ones." "Soles worn thin." "No." He nodded once. Reached under the desk. Pulled out a pair of steel-toed boots. Set them on the floor. "My wife's. Size 8. She don't wear 'em anymore. Sir, I put 'em on. We're walking the back lot. Glass everywhere." She sat down. She put them on. They fit. Because of course they did. The back lot was a graveyard of concrete. Cracked slabs stacked in leaning towers. Broken culverts stripped of their rebar. Piles of aggregate 10 feet high. And in the far northwest corner, next to a chain-link fence, and a creosote bush the size of a small car, one section of storm drain pipe lying on its side in the gravel. 30 feet long. 8 feet across at the mouth. A hairline crack running down one flank. A red X spray painted on the rim. Silas stopped in front of it. Odessa stopped beside him. She did not say anything for a long time. Because there it was. Because God had answered the prayer of a 6-year-old boy with a paper hat that said Math Superstar. She put her hand on the concrete. It was warm from the morning sun. She could feel the strength of it under her palm. The mass. The permanence. "How much?" she said. Her voice came out thin. Silas looked at her. Not at the pipe. At her. He was reading her the way her father used to read a slab. He said, "What are you gonna do with it?" She swallowed. "I'm gonna live in it." He did not react. He did not blink. He did not laugh. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked past her. At the parking lot. At the Ford Ranger, with the boy in the front seat. At the cardboard on the windshield. At the plastic bins in the truck bed. At the ironing board strapped to the roof. He looked back at her. And something in his face, some tiny thing behind his eyes, went soft. He said, "$3.50. She reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out the coffee can. She set the can on the rim of the pipe. She counted out the money onto the concrete. Ones, fives, tens, 20s. Silas watched her count. She got to 350. She stopped. There were still bills in the can. $30. Emergency money. She was going to leave it in the can. She was. Except Silas reached out. He picked up $30 off the pipe. He pushed it back across the concrete at her. Delivery, he said, runs $4.80. Saturday my driver's headed out that way anyhow. You ride along. Help him with the straps. Cover his lunch. Call it even. She looked at him. She could not speak. Because he had not just given her $30. He had given her the delivery. He had given her the whole beginning. Sir, Silas. Silas. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, ma'am. He was looking away now. At the fence. At the creosote. My daughter, he said. And then he stopped. He cleared his throat. My daughter's name was Cora. Odessa did not move. She died in 2011. Cancer. She was 34. She had a little boy. 4 years old. He was still looking at the fence. She was raising him alone. Working 2 jobs. She was gonna be all right. She just needed a little more time. He turned back to Odessa. His eyes were very clear. Very steady. You reminded me of her. From the phone call. Before I even saw you. Odessa did not say anything. Because there was nothing to say. Silas cleared his throat again. My driver will be by at 7 Saturday morning. You be here at 6:30. Bring the boy. He can ride up front. He turned. He walked back toward the office. 10 steps. Then he stopped. He turned around. And he said, Ma'am? Yes, sir. I lied. Delivery runs 640. And then he walked into the office and shut the door. She sat in the truck for 10 minutes before she could drive. Rowan was looking at her. He said, Mama. She said, Yeah, baby. Did God send you a pipe? Yeah, baby. Was my prayer enough? She reached over. She held his little face in her hands. She said, Enough to break the sky open, baby. And she started the truck. Wilhelmina Ashford was 76 years old. She was 5 feet tall. Maybe. In her Sunday shoes. She wore a lavender cardigan and a wooden cross on a leather cord and reading glasses on top of her head that she was constantly losing and finding again. Her husband, Elias, had died in 2014 of a stroke in the kitchen of the farmhouse he had built for her with his own hands in 1966. She had 5 acres of pecan trees just outside a little town called Chino Valley. The pecans hadn't done well since the drought started. She hadn't had a real harvest in 3 years. She was living on Social Security and canned peaches and the mercy of the Grace Methodist Ladies Auxiliary. She met Odessa in the food bank line the same afternoon Odessa drove home from Broussard Concrete. Odessa hadn't planned to go. She'd been driving past. She'd seen the line snaking out the door of the community center. And she thought, Rowan needs eggs. He needs eggs. So she parked. And she'd stood in line. And Wilhelmina had been 3 people ahead of her. She was the kind of old lady who talked to everybody, which meant everybody talked back. She was telling the story of her tomato plants to a woman with a baby on her hip. Then she turned around. And she saw Odessa. And she said, without preamble, Honey, you look like a woman with something on her mind. Odessa did not know what to say. Wilhelmina reached out and patted her arm. You want to tell me about it? And Odessa Brennan, who had told no one in 14 months, told her. Not everything. Not the truck. Just the pipe. The land. The idea. She said it very fast, like a woman trying to get it out before her courage ran off. Wilhelmina listened. She did not interrupt. She stood in the food bank line with a paper number in her hand, and she listened like Odessa was reading her the Sermon on the Mount. When Odessa was done, Wilhelmina said, "Well, that was all." "Well?" Then she said, "I've got 5 acres, and a back corner I'm not doing a thing with. $20 a month. That land belongs to God, honey. I'm just keeping it warm for the next person." Odessa put her hand over her mouth. Wilhelmina said, "Sweetheart, don't cry in the food bank. They'll think it's the peaches." And Odessa laughed. And Wilhelmina laughed. And a woman 2 people back said, "Amen." And the pipe had a home. The boom truck came at 7 a.m. on Saturday. Rowan wore his best shirt. He rode in the cab of the flatbed the whole way, from Broussard's to Chino Valley, between Odessa and a driver named Dwayne, who chewed sunflower seeds and let Rowan spit the shells out the window. The pipe was on the trailer behind them. 30 feet of it. Odessa kept turning around in her seat to make sure it was still there, because in 14 months of homelessness she had learned that things you cannot afford to lose have a way of disappearing. But the pipe was still there. Wilhelmina met them at the gate. She was standing next to a cardboard sign she had made herself. It said, "Welcome home," with a smiley face, and a picture of a pecan tree. Rowan looked up at the sign. He said, "Mama, is this our house?" Odessa said, "This is where our house is going to be, baby." And Dwayne, the truck driver, with the sunflower seeds, coughed hard into his fist and looked out the window for a long time. Because grown men cry too. They just don't like anybody to see. The pad had already been leveled. Odessa had done it over 3 weekends before delivery. Shovel, wheelbarrow, plate compactor she'd rented for $22 a day. String line stretched between 2 rebar stakes, the way her daddy had taught her when she was 11 years old. Wayne set the pipe on the pad. The whole earth shook. A cloud of caliche dust went up over the pecan trees. And when the dust settled, there it was. A concrete pipe, 30 feet long, sitting in the sun, on a widow's back lot, under a sky the color of a robin's egg. Dwayne looked at it. He looked at Odessa. He said, "Ma'am, what in God's name are you gonna do with that?" And Odessa Brennan wiped the dust off her face with the back of her hand and said, "I'm gonna make it a house, Dwayne." He nodded. He climbed back in his truck. He drove away. She started with cleaning, because that was the job she knew. Because for 13 years she had cleaned 180 rooms a week, and she knew that the only way to build something new was to first take the old out of it. She wire brushed the inside of the pipe down to sound concrete. 3 weekends. Her arm shook for 2 days after every shift. She cut out the crack with a rented angle grinder, filled it with hydraulic cement, ground the walls smooth, sealed the whole thing with a concrete densifier that she paid for by hauling scrap metal to a recycler on Iron Springs Road. By the end of the first month, the inside of the pipe smelled like wet stone instead of rats. She was living out of the Ford Ranger, parked at the far end of Wilhelmina's driveway, plugged into an outdoor outlet with an extension cord for her space heater. Wilhelmina had brought her a thermos of coffee every morning for 6 weeks. And in the evenings, Wilhelmina would come out onto the porch and holler across the pecan orchard, "Honey, supper," and Odessa would come to the farmhouse. And she and Rowan would sit at Wilhelmina's kitchen table under a picture of Elias in his wedding suit, and they would eat pot roast. and Wilhelmina would say grace, and Rowan would say amen. The framing was harder than the cleaning, because framing a wall into an 8-foot circle is nothing like framing a flat one. Every stud had to be cut to a different length. Every joint had to be angled. Every board had to match a curve nature did not usually cut. Odessa flattened a refrigerator box she'd hauled out of the dumpster behind a Home Depot. She held it up against the mouth of the pipe. She traced the curve with a carpenter's pencil. Then she carried that piece of cardboard around for 6 weeks like it was the map to the Ark of the Covenant. She cut every stud off it. She built the front wall. She hung a solid core wooden door she'd bought at the Habitat for Humanity restore for $18. She framed an aluminum sliding glass window on one side. Salvage. From the old Copper Ridge Inn, the new owners had gutted the place and left everything in a dumpster on the curb. She had gone at midnight with a flashlight. She had pulled that window out with her bare hands. Some things are worth reclaiming. The paneling on the ceiling came from a lot she found on Craigslist. Warm laminate boards, tongue and groove, $340 for enough to line the whole ceiling. She installed it on her hands and knees, upside down, standing on a milk crate. She got a splinter in her thumb the size of a matchstick. She kept going, because she was going to have a ceiling. She was going to have a ceiling, if it killed her. And then July came. She had been building for 2 months. The pipe was clean. The front wall was framed. The back wall was framed. The window was in. The door was in. The paneling was starting to go up. She was so close to a house. Which is when the desert came for her. The first hot night was July 11th. She had put Rowan to bed at Wilhelmina's. The pipe was not livable yet, but he was staying more and more nights at the farmhouse, and it was killing her. Because a boy should sleep with his mother. That night, she decided to sleep in the pipe. She had a moving blanket, and a pillow, and a battery lantern. She rolled the blanket out on the curved floor. She turned off the lantern. She lay down. The temperature outside was 68 degrees. The temperature inside the pipe was 96. She sat up. She put her hand on the wall. The concrete was burning her palm. Burning. Because the pipe had spent all day in the sun. Because the mass she had been counting on to keep her cool was a battery. And the battery had been charging all day. And it was giving her the whole charge back at once. She stood up. She walked outside. The desert night was cool. The pipe was an oven. She had rebuilt the truck. She sat down in the dirt. She put her head in her hands. She said, out loud to nobody, no. No, 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 no. Lord, did you bring me all this way to build me a hotter box than the one you took me out of? There was no answer. Just crickets. Just the pecan trees. Just her son sleeping in a widow's guest room 100 yards away. She sat in the dirt for 2 hours. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not pray. She just sat. Because sometimes the only faith you have left is the faith to keep sitting. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she stood up. She wiped the dirt off her jeans. She walked to the truck. She got the notebook. She turned to a fresh page. And she wrote, I built the wrong house. I don't know what to do. But I'm going to find out. She went to the library on Monday morning. The librarian with the beaded chain saw her come in. She looked at Odessa's face. She said, oh honey, what did it do? And Odessa laughed. Wet. Broken. Real. It got hot. And the librarian nodded like a woman who had heard this exact sentence before. She said, come with me. She walked Odessa back to a different shelf. She pulled down 3 books. She put them in Odessa's hands. You had the right idea. You just insulated it wrong. Odessa said, what? The librarian said, "You wrapped a thermos on the inside, sugar. You gotta wrap it on the outside. Otherwise all that concrete's just gonna eat the heat during the day and spit it back at you at night." She tapped the top book with a lacquered fingernail. "This one. Chapter 4. Read it twice." Odessa read it 3 times. She sat at the wooden table by the window. She read for 4 hours. And she understood. Concrete is a battery. Batteries hold whatever you charge them with. If you charge it with cool morning air and then insulate it so the sun cannot reach it during the day, the battery stays cool. If you leave it out in the sun with no shield, it becomes a furnace. She had wrapped the pipe on the wrong side. She needed the foam on the outside. She needed the earth on the outside. She needed the concrete on the inside, sheltered, quiet, cool. She closed the book. She sat there staring out at Goodwin Street. And she said, out loud, in the middle of the library, "Oh Lord, I have been such a fool." The old man 3 tables over looked up. He said, "Ma'am, haven't we all?" She got the foam board for free. Because in Prescott, in the summer of 2023, a commercial roofing crew was replacing the entire roof of the Marriott downtown, and they were throwing rigid XPS foam insulation into a dumpster every single day. Odessa cleaned that dumpster out. Every night for 2 weeks. Sheet by sheet. She hauled it in the bed of the Ranger. And she paid for it in labor. She offered to strip and clean the crew's brake trailer for 3 days in exchange for permission to keep hauling. The foreman said yes, before she finished the sentence. She glued the foam board to the outside of the pipe with construction adhesive. She wrapped the whole thing in chicken wire. She hand-mixed 3 coats of stucco in a mortar tub that had belonged to her father, that she had kept in the back of every closet of every apartment she'd ever rented. She had never plastered a wall in her life. She had watched her father do it 100 times. The first coat looked like something a child had smeared on a cake. The second coat was better. The third coat looked like a building. She stood back. She looked at it. She said, "Daddy, Daddy, I did it." And she wiped her face with her forearm. Then she picked up a shovel. She started burning earth up the west and north sides. 38 wheelbarrows over 12 days. She scattered native seed on top, brittle bush and fairy duster, and desert marigold, because Wilhelmina had said, "Sugar, if you're gonna have a hill, you might as well have a pretty one." And when it was done, the pipe was no longer a pipe. It was a mound. A curved earthen shape rising out of the pecan orchard like a chapel. Roof of grasses. Walls of stucco. And inside, the concrete slept in the shade. On July 22nd, at 3 in the afternoon, when the temperature outside was 108 degrees, Odessa walked into the pipe and put her hand on the wall. The concrete was 78. 78. She stood there for a long time. Then she went and got Rowan from the farmhouse. She carried him inside. She set him down in the middle of the dim curved floor. And she said, "Baby, feel the wall." He put his hand on the concrete. His eyes went wide. He said, "Mama, it's cold. But it's summer." "Yeah, baby." "Mama, is this magic?" She knelt down. She put her forehead against his. She said, "No, baby. This is God, doing what he always does. Only most people can't hear him." And Rowan whispered, "I can hear him, Mama." And Odessa said, "I know you can." Alistair Novak was 71 years old. He had a gray flat top haircut and blue eyes that had been reading electrical schematics since 1971 and hands that had wired the avionics on 140 F-16 fighter jets at Luke Air Force Base outside Glendale. He lived alone in a little block house in Chino Valley with a rescue border collie named Betty. He heard about Odessa from his niece. The niece worked the counter at Ashford Feed and Supply. Wilhelmina had come in one Wednesday morning to buy chicken scratch, and had told the whole store, in some detail, about the woman living in the concrete pipe on her back 40. And the niece had gone home to her uncle for Sunday dinner, and told him the story. And Alistair Novak had said, "Say that again." She had said it again. And Alistair had said, quietly, into his coffee, "Well, I'll be damned." The next Sunday, he drove out to Chino Valley. He parked at the end of Wilhelmina's driveway. He walked down, through the pecan orchard, with a toolbox in his hand. Odessa was on a ladder against the outside of the mound, plastering a spot she had missed. She saw him coming. She climbed down. She wiped her hands on her jeans. They stood facing each other in the shadow of the pecan trees. He looked at the house. He looked at her. He said, "You the pipe woman?" She said, "I guess I am." He said, "I heard." She said, "From who?" He said, "My niece." Who heard from Miss Wilhelmina. Who told everybody at the feed store. She almost laughed. He said, "I did electrical for the Air Force for damn near 30 years, ma'am. Retired in '03. Been bored ever since." He set his toolbox on the ground. He said, "You need a hand?" Odessa looked at him. She looked at the toolbox. She looked at the sky. And she said, very quietly, "Yes, sir. I do." Alistair Novak wired her whole house. Over 4 weekends. He would arrive at 7 a.m. on Saturday with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of pastries from a bakery in Chino Valley, and he would work until the sun went down. He wired lights that followed the curve of the ceiling. He wired outlets low on the wall. He wired a small refrigerator and a fan, and one dedicated plug on the loft wall, next to where the reading light would go. "What's this one for?" Odessa said. "The boy," Alistair said. "What?" "For the boy's tablet. School'll give him one sooner or later. Kid needs a plug that don't wobble." She had to turn away. Alistair explained every step as he worked. He would say, "See this? This is a 14-2. 14 gauge, 2 conductor. Ground here. Hot here. Neutral here. You memorize that, ma'am. Because a house you built with your hands is a house you should be able to fix with your hands." And Odessa memorized. She wrote it down. She asked questions. She held the flashlight. She learned. And when he finished, when the last outlet was in, and the last switch was screwed to the wall, and the whole house came on at once, with the flip of a breaker, Alistair Novak stood in the middle of the curved floor, with his hands on his hips. He said, "Well, that'll do." And he pulled a folded piece of graph paper out of his shirt pocket. He handed it to Odessa. "What's this?" she said. "Wiring diagram," he said. "Whole house. Every circuit. Every load. Signed and dated." She unfolded it. His handwriting was small and precise. He said, "You keep that somewhere safe, ma'am." She said, "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. And then he said, "Because sooner or later, someone's gonna come. And they're gonna want to see it. And when they do, you hand him this." She said, "Who's gonna come?" He said, "The county always comes." She did not understand. She would not understand for another 12 days. Because on the morning of February 28, 2024, 5 months and 3 weeks after Silas Broussard sold her a piece of pipe, and 4 months after the pipe became a house, Odessa Brennan came home from her shift at the vacation rental. She pulled up the dirt road past the pecan trees. She saw something on her door. Yellow. Her stomach dropped. She got out of the truck. She walked up to the door. She read the notice. Yavapai County Development Services. Unpermitted structure. Unapproved dwelling. 30 days to respond. Demolition on the table. She stood there. She read it again. She read it a third time. She sat down on the step. She did not move for a long time. The sun went down behind the Bradshaw Mountains. Rowan was at Wilhelmina's. He would be there for another hour. 5 months of labor. 1,400 hours. $2,100. Every muscle in her back. Every callus on her hands. All of it on a yellow piece of paper. She whispered, "Lord, did you bring me all this way just to watch them take it?" There was no answer. Just the wind in the pecan trees. Just the light going out of the sky. Odessa did not sleep that night. She sat on the step until the stars came out. Then until they went in. Then until the first thin band of pink came up over the Bradshaw Mountains. The yellow paper was on her lap the whole time. She read it 20 times. Then she stopped reading it. Because reading it did not change it. Because reading it did not unwrite a single word. Around 4 in the morning, she stood up. Her knees cracked. Her back was stiff. She walked down the dirt road to the truck. She got in. She turned the key. She drove. Not to work. Not to Wilhelmina's. She drove to Grace Methodist Church. Because that is where she had gone with every problem since August of 2022. Because the parking lot under the cottonwoods was the closest thing to home she had known. She parked. She got out. She walked around to the side door. It was unlocked. Of course it was. Because Pastor Elliot Reeves had been unlocking that door at 5 a.m. every morning for 19 years, so that anybody who needed a place to sit could sit. She went in. She walked past the fellowship hall, past the nursery, past the coffee pot she had helped clean 100 Sundays. She sat down in the back pew. She did not kneel. She did not fold her hands. She just sat. And she said, very quietly, to the empty sanctuary, "I tried." That was all. I tried and I tried and I tried. I don't know what else to do. She sat there for a long time. The light through the stained glass came up slow. Blue. Then rose. Then gold. And Odessa Brennan did not know it. She could not know it. But at that exact moment, 41 miles away in a rented apartment on the west side of Prescott, a 34-year-old architect named Corbin Halloway was already awake, packing his daughter's lunch for kindergarten, and thinking about a story he had overheard the night before. Wilhelmina had told it in the fellowship hall. Corbin had been in the men's room down the hall. He had come out to get his coat. And he had stopped in the doorway. Because a small round old woman in a lavender cardigan was telling a group of church ladies about a mother who had built a house out of a piece of concrete pipe. And who was about to lose it. Corbin had stood in the doorway, with his hand on the coat rack. He had not moved. He had listened. And the whole time Wilhelmina was talking, he had been hearing his own mother. His mother, Alma Halloway, who had raised him alone in a 1978 single-wide trailer in Deming, New Mexico. Who had worked as a certified nursing assistant at a nursing home on the highway. Who had died of a stroke at 43, the year Corbin turned 15, alone in that mobile home, 3 hours before he came home from his after-school job at the auto parts store. She had been fighting the park owner in court to keep the lot. She had been about to lose it. Corbin still had the letter from the park's lawyer, folded in a shoebox in the top of his closet. He had been 15 years old when his mother died. He had prayed every night for a year before that God would send somebody. Somebody who knew how to fight for a mobile home. Somebody who knew the law. Somebody who knew architecture. Anybody. Nobody came. Corbin Halloway had gone to college on a grant for kids of deceased parents. He had gone to architecture school on loans. He had passed his licensing exam 3 years ago. He had moved to Prescott 8 months earlier for a job at a firm that mostly designed custom houses for California retirees. And he had a daughter now, Iris, 5 years old. Same brown eyes as his mother. Same laugh. And his wife had left the year before. And Corbin was raising Iris alone in a rented apartment. And every night, after Iris fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a glass of ginger ale, and he thought about his mother. He had promised her, silently, in his own head, in a graveyard in Deming, at the age of 15, that he would become the man she had waited for. He had not been that man yet. And then, on a Thursday night in Grace Methodist Church, in the doorway of the fellowship hall, holding his coat, he heard Wilhelmina Ashford say, 30 days, or they demolish it. And Corbin Halloway went very still. He drove out to the pecan orchard the next morning. Saturday, 7:45 a.m. He had not slept much. He had gotten Iris ready, dropped her at his mother-in-law's for the day. He drove out to Chino Valley. He turned down the dirt road past the pecan trees. He rounded a bend. And there it was, a small round house, the color of a desert sunset, stucco walls, wooden door, a round window on the west side, glinting in the morning light, and a mound of green earth rising up behind it like the back of a sleeping animal. Corbin stopped his car. He got out. He stood in the road. And he looked at it. He was an architect. He had studied at Arizona State. He had toured Taliesin West with his graduate class. He had seen adobe villages in New Mexico. He had seen earth-bag domes in Colorado. He had never seen this. He walked around it. He walked around it twice. He looked at the stucco. Smooth, hand-troweled 3 coats. He looked at the door. Solid core. Salvaged. Properly hung. He looked at the earth berm. Well drained. Native seed. Someone had thought about erosion. He put his hand against the wall. Cool? Cool in the sun. He walked to the mouth of the pipe. He knelt down. He looked at the concrete stamp on the end of the pipe. He read it. ASTM C76 Class III. He read it again. Because Class 3 meant this pipe was rated to carry highway loads. Under fill. Under trucks. Under interstates. He was looking at a structure that was over-engineered by a factor of about 10. He stood up. He said, out loud, to nobody, "Oh my God." Odessa was in the door. She had heard a car. She had come around the corner. She was in her work clothes. Bandana over her hair. A trowel in her hand, from patching a spot on the north wall. She saw a young man in khakis, and a button-down shirt standing next to her house. Her stomach dropped, because well-dressed men in khakis did not show up on a widow's back 40 for good reasons. She said, "Can I help you?" He turned. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet. He said, "Ma'am?" "Yes." "Are you the woman who built this?" "I am." He walked toward her, slowly, like he was afraid of scaring her off. He stopped 10 feet away. He said, "My name is Corbin Halloway. I'm an architect. I'm licensed in the state of Arizona." She said, "Okay." He said, "I heard about you last night. At Grace Methodist. I was there for a men's ministry thing. I overheard Miss Wilhelmina." She said, "Okay." He said, "Ma'am, my mother raised me alone, in a mobile home in New Mexico. She died when I was 15. She was fighting to keep our lot. She lost." Odessa did not move. He said, quieter, "I prayed every night for a year that someone would come help her. Nobody came. He was looking at the ground now. I've been an architect for 3 years. I have my stamp. I have my seal. He looked up. Ma'am, please, let me be the man my mother waited for. Odessa Brennan dropped the trowel. She did not remember dropping it. She heard it hit the dirt. She stood there in the sunlight, with her mouth open and her heart somewhere in her throat. She said, "What did you say?" Corbin Halloway said it again. Slower. "Let me help you keep your house. I want to stamp your plans. For free." And Odessa Brennan sat down. Right there. In the dirt. In the shadow of the concrete pipe she had bought for $350. She covered her face with her hands. And she said, into her palms, "He sent you. He sent you." And Corbin Halloway, standing above her in his khakis and his button-down shirt, with his stamp and seal folded in his back pocket, said, very quietly, "Yes, ma'am. I believe he did." Corbin drew up the plans over the next 12 days. He worked at his kitchen table after Iris was asleep. He drove out to the orchard 3 more times to measure. He measured every stud, every joint, every span. He photographed Alistair's wiring diagram. He wrote the structural narrative himself. He referenced the ASTM C76 Class III certification. He cited the Yavapai County Residential Code, section by section. He made a formal argument, in legal architectural language, that this concrete pipe, buried and insulated per Odessa's method, exceeded every applicable structural standard in the county. He submitted it under his own stamp, his own seal, his own license number, his own liability. He did not charge her a cent. The county came back with 3 requirements. 1. A permitted composting toilet. 2. Hardwired smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. 3. A second means of egress. The round washing machine porthole she had put in the east wall, as a whimsy, the round window Corbin had noticed, from the road, was not big enough for a person to climb out of. She needed a real egress window. She had 3 weeks. Alistair Novak came out the next Sunday. He heard the news. He said one sentence. "I'll do the smokes." That was it. Wilhelmina Ashford called a contractor she knew in Chino Valley. He was a member of Grace Methodist. He agreed to sell Odessa a slightly damaged egress window unit for $80 and install it for a case of Coke and a homemade peach pie. Wilhelmina baked the pie herself. Odessa provided the Coke. The composting toilet was the hardest, because it cost $1,400. Because Odessa had exactly $412 to her name. She sat at Wilhelmina's kitchen table on a Tuesday night, with a calculator and a stack of receipts, and she cried. Wilhelmina put a hand on her arm. "Sugar." "I know." "Sugar, look at me." Odessa looked up. Wilhelmina said, "You remember when I told you that back corner belongs to God?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well?" Wilhelmina reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a folded envelope. She set it on the table. She said, "This came in the mail Monday? My Elias had a life insurance policy I forgot about." "Well, I didn't forget about it. I just didn't want to think about it. I finally called the company last month. It was $1,500 sugar. From 1982. Odessa put her hand over her mouth. Wilhelmina slid the envelope across the table. "I want you to take $1,400 of it." "Ma'am, I can't." "Yes, you can." "Ma'am, please." Odessa Brennan. Wilhelmina's voice was suddenly firm. Suddenly the voice of a 76-year-old widow who had raised 3 sons on a schoolteacher's salary and had not taken no for an answer since the Truman administration. "My Elias would like nothing better than to buy that boy a proper toilet." Odessa was crying again. Wilhelmina was crying too. They both laughed. Because sometimes an angel comes with a $1,500 life insurance check from 1982. She bought the composting toilet. Alistair installed the smoke and CO detectors. The contractor installed the egress window. Odessa did the rest. The inspection was scheduled for March 5, 2024. 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Odessa did not sleep the night before. She and Rowan stayed at Wilhelmina's. Wilhelmina made pancakes at 6 a.m. Rowan ate 4. Odessa could not eat one. She drove out to the house at 7:30. She swept. She dusted. She wiped down the counters. She laid out Alistair's wiring diagram on the counter, flat, smoothed, the graph paper immaculate. She laid out Corbin's stamped plans next to it. She put a fresh vase of desert marigolds she had cut herself in the middle of the table. Because a house should look like a house. Because dignity is the fact that you cared. The inspector arrived at 8:58. His name was Harold Bettinger. He was 59 years old. Silver-rimmed glasses. Yavapai County polo shirt. Clipboard. He got out of his truck. He stood in the road. He looked at the house. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he walked up to the door. He knocked. Odessa opened it. She said, "Good morning, sir." He said, "Ma'am." She said, "Please come in." He came in. He stood in the middle of the curved floor, and he looked up at the ceiling. The barrel vault. The warm laminate paneling. The strip of soft LED light that ran along the arc. He looked down at the polished concrete floor. He looked at the small brass faucet in the kitchen. The Habitat for Humanity door. The salvaged aluminum window. The egress window in the east wall. The composting toilet in its little curved alcove behind a curtain Wilhelmina had sewn. He walked around. He went into every corner. He checked the smoke detector. He looked at Alistair's wiring diagram on the counter. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. He set it back down. He walked over to Corbin's plans. He looked at those. He read the structural narrative. He read every page. He read the ASTM certification. He looked at Odessa. He said, "Ma'am, can I ask you a question?" She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Did you build this?" She said, "With my hands and God's help." "Yes, sir." He said, "And this diagram? Who did the electrical?" She said, "A man named Alistair Novak. He wired F-16s at Luke for 30 years. He would not take a cent." He said, "Of course he wouldn't." He looked around one more time. He walked to the door. He turned around. He said, "Ma'am, in 23 years of doing this job, I have inspected a lot of homes, and I have never approved one made out of a piece of drainage pipe." He paused. He said, "But this is the tightest, cleanest, best engineered custom dwelling I have inspected this month. And I do not know how you did this on $2,100. He took out his stamp. He stamped the front page of the file. Approved. He handed it to Odessa. He said, "Congratulations. You have a permitted home." She held the paper in both hands. She looked at it. Then she looked up at him. She could not speak. Harold Bettinger cleared his throat. He said, "My mother lived in a fifth-wheel trailer for the last 11 years of her life. She lost her house in the recession. She used to say the only thing wrong with her trailer was that nobody would call it a house." He tipped his head at Odessa. He said, "Ma'am, you built a house. Don't let anybody tell you different." And Harold Bettinger walked out, and got in his truck, and drove away. And Odessa Brennan sat down on the polished concrete floor of her own home. And she wept. She wept the way you weep when a 20-month war ends. She wept until she was empty. And then she got up. She did not tell Rowan yet. She waited 3 days. She wanted to do it on a Sunday. After church. In the good clothes. In the sunlight. She wanted him to remember it right. Because a boy should remember the day he came home. Sunday, March 10th, 2024. Odessa put Rowan in his church clothes. White shirt. Clip-on tie. Little dress shoes she had scrubbed with a toothbrush the night before. She wore the blue dress. The one she had not worn since Copper Ridge's Christmas party in 2021. They sat in the second row. Wilhelmina was in the pew behind them. Pastor Elliot Reeves preached on the story of the widow's mite. He preached about how God does not measure the size of the offering. He measures the size of the heart that gave it. He looked at Odessa when he preached. She held Rowan's hand. She did not cry. She just listened. And when the closing hymn came, "Great is thy faithfulness," she stood up and she sang. After the service, she took Rowan by the hand. She said, "Baby, I want to show you something." He said, "What?" She said, "You have to come see." "Is it a surprise?" "Yes." "A good one." She squeezed his hand. "The best one." She drove him out to the pecan orchard. She had told him for months that she had been doing construction work on the weekends, which was technically true. She had never told him what she was building, or for whom. He looked out the window. He looked at the road. He looked at the trees. "Mama, where are we going?" "You'll see." She turned down the dirt road. She rounded the bend. And there it was. Small. Round. Stucco walls the color of a sunset. Wooden door with a brass handle. Round window on the west side, catching the noon light. Green earth mound rising behind it. Solar panels glinting on top. And a hand-lettered sign staked in the dirt out front, painted by Wilhelmina Ashford in shaky lavender letters. The Brennan house. Rowan sat forward in his seat. He said, "Mama." She stopped the truck. He said, "Whose house is that?" She did not answer. He said louder, "Mama, whose house is that?" She turned to look at him. She said, very quietly, "Ours, baby. Ours." He looked at her. He looked at the house. He looked at her. He said, "Mine and yours?" She said, "Yours and mine." He was out of the truck before she could unbuckle her seatbelt. He ran. He ran across the caliche in his little dress shoes. He ran up to the wooden door. He stopped. He put his hand on the door handle. He looked back at her. He was waiting for permission. She got out of the truck. She walked up behind him. She put her hand on his shoulder. She said, "Go on, baby. It's ours." He opened the door. He stepped inside. The air smelled like new terracotta plaster. Warm and clean. Like a garden after rain. Sunlight was pouring in through the round west window. It made a perfect gold circle on the polished concrete floor. He stood in that circle of light, and he looked up at the ceiling. The warm strip of light along the arc. The wooden paneling. The barrel vault glowing like the inside of a chapel. He was very still. Then he walked over to the sleeping alcove. The one built into the wall below the loft. With a little reading light. With a shelf cut into the framing for his books. He looked at the pillow. He looked at the wall next to the pillow. He froze. Because there, set into the plaster next to, where his head would rest at night, was a single square terracotta tile. And pressed into the tile, in a child's handwriting Odessa had guided, with her own finger 3 nights before, Rowan. R-O-W-A-N. His name. In the wall. Forever. He put his hand on it. The tile was cool under his small fingers. He did not move. Odessa stood in the doorway. Her hand was over her mouth. Rowan turned around. Very slowly. His eyes were huge. He said, "Mama." She could not speak. He said, "Mama, God heard me. Didn't he?" She dropped to her knees. Right there in the doorway. She held out her arms. He ran to her. He crashed into her. His whole small body. His clip-on ties sliding sideways. His little dress shoes scuffing the polished floor. She held him. She held him, and she rocked him, and she pressed her face into his hair. And she said, into the top of his head, "Yes, baby. He heard you." The Prescott News picked up the story 2 weeks later. A reporter named Diane Alcott heard about it from a friend at the community center. She drove out. She interviewed Odessa in front of the wooden door. She took photographs. The photograph that ran on the front page of the Sunday paper on March 24, 2024, was Odessa Brennan and her son Rowan sitting on the step of their round stucco house, with the pecan trees in the background, and the sunlight coming in low and gold, and Rowan holding a book about a fox who lived in a hole. The headline read, "The House That Odessa Built." The story went further than anybody expected. It got picked up by a Phoenix station, then a national wire. Within 10 days, Odessa had 3 job offers. A construction firm in Phoenix, $78,000 a year. A design consultancy in Scottsdale, 65 plus benefits. A speaking gig at Arizona State University's architecture school. She sat at her kitchen table, with the offer letters spread in front of her. Rowan was doing his homework at the other end of the table. He looked up. He said, "Mama." "Yeah, baby. Are we gonna move?" She looked at him. She looked at the letters. She looked at the tile, with his name in the wall. She thought about how many schools he had changed. 3. In 2 years. She thought about how the first time he had slept in his own bed in this house, he had slept for 14 hours straight. She thought about how a boy's body remembers what safety feels like even after his mind forgets. She thought about every angel God had sent her in 20 months. And she picked up the offer letters, one by one, and she set them face down on the table. She looked at her son. She said, "No, baby. We're home." 2 weeks later, she called Silas Broussard. She said, "Sir, Odessa, Silas, I need to ask you a favor. Anything. Can I use your back lot on Saturday mornings?" "What for?" She took a breath. "I want to teach." "Teach what?" "How to do what I did." There was a long pause on the line. Then Silas said, "Ma'am, I'll bring the coffee." The first workshop was on the second Saturday in April. Odessa did not advertise. She just told the ladies at Grace Methodist. She just told the food bank. She just told the counter clerk at Ashford Feed and Supply. 21 people showed up. They stood in a semicircle on the back lot of Broussard Concrete and precast at 8 a.m. Some of them had brought notebooks. Some of them had brought their kids. One woman was pregnant. Another had a black eye and had not said where it came from. Odessa stood in front of them, with Silas beside her. She had rehearsed a speech. She had written it out on the back of an envelope the night before. She got up in front of them. She looked at them. She threw the envelope away. And she said, "Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. This is hard. You are going to fail. You are going to cry. You are going to want to quit." She paused. She looked at the pregnant woman. She looked at the woman with the black eye. She said, "But this pipe? Right here." She pointed at a 30-foot section of storm drain lying on the gravel behind her. This pipe was going to be crushed for road base in 14 days. Nobody wanted it. Nobody could use it. And now it's going to be a house. She looked back at them. "And what I want you to understand is, that so are you. Somebody somewhere told you that you were done, that your life was going to be crushed for road base. They were wrong. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because you are not the pipe. You are the woman with the shovel. And that pipe is waiting for you. Nobody clapped. They just stood there. The pregnant woman was crying. The woman with the black eye was writing in her notebook. A little boy, 5 years old, maybe 6, was holding his mother's hand and staring at Odessa like she was made of stars. And Odessa took a breath. And she said, "Now, let me teach you how to read a class stamp on the end of a pipe." She had bought the coffee out of her own pocket. She never took a cent. Not from any of them. 2 years passed. Alistair Novak wired every one of the new pipes for free. Corbin Halloway stamped every set of plans. Wilhelmina Ashford leased out 2 more corners of her orchard at $20 a month to 2 more mothers with children and no place to go. By the end of 2025, 6 new pipe houses stood on land around Prescott Valley and Chino Valley. 3 of them were finished. 3 were still under construction. 3 families were living in homes they had built with their own hands. And every one of them had walked into a concrete yard and asked the same question Odessa had asked. Do you ever have pipe you can't sell? Rowan turned 9 in the fall of 2025. He was in the 3rd grade at Willow Creek Elementary, where he had started kindergarten. He liked math. He liked frogs. He read every night in his sleeping alcove under the reading light Alistair had installed for him, next to the tile, with his name on it. On the night before Christmas Eve, 2025, Rowan fell asleep, with his book still open on his chest. Odessa lifted the book off him. She closed it. She set it on the shelf next to his bed. She kissed his forehead. She turned off the reading light. She walked out into the main room. The house was quiet. The barrel vault glowed, with the soft strip of LED Alistair had wired along its arc. The fire in the little cast iron stove, the one someone had left on a pallet, with a note saying it deserved another house, was down to red coals. Outside, the Sonoran night was deep and cold and clean. She opened the wooden door. She stepped out onto the wooden step. She sat down. The sky above Chino Valley was black and full of stars. Odessa pulled the small green notebook out of the pocket of her cardigan. She had been carrying it for 3 years. The cover was faded. Some of the pages had come loose. Day 1 was August 3rd, 2022. In the parking lot of a Walmart. She flipped to the last written page. She uncapped her pen. She wrote, Day 1, 240. I sat on the step of my own house tonight. My boy is asleep. He is safe. He is warm. She paused. She looked up at the sky. She thought about her mother, buried in a small cemetery outside Kingman. She thought about her father, who had taught her how to read a slab. She thought about Harlan Beaufort in his bureau tie. She thought about the strangers. Silas, Wilhelmina, Alistair, Corbin, Harold. She thought about the pastor, who had never once locked the church door. She thought about the librarian with the beaded chain. She thought about the security guard at the Walmart, who had told her about Grace Methodist. She looked back at the notebook. She wrote, "Thank you for sending them, every one." She closed the notebook. She held it in her lap. She sat there. The stars did not need to answer, because the answer was in the door behind her, because the answer was in the boy sleeping in the alcove, because the answer was in the 6 other pipes sitting on land around Prescott and Chino Valley, waiting for the mothers who would come and ask the question. Odessa Brennan smiled. Alone, in the dark, on Christmas Eve morning, 3 hours from sunrise, in northern Arizona. She smiled. She stood up. She walked back inside. She closed the wooden door. She turned the deadbolt. And she went to bed. In her own home. Under her own roof. Next to the boy who had once asked, in a parked truck at the edge of a Walmart lot, whether God had a favorite kid. And whose mother now knew the answer. He loves every one of them the same. But he listens close when you talk to him.